Hello everyone, welcome back to a very special video. I'm DTM as always, and with Book VII coming to a close and Book VIII on the way, I figured now is the time to do our yearly tradition and do a top 10 most meta-impactful units of Book VII. I've done one for Book V, I've done one for Book VI, and it's now Book VII's turn, and we do have quite a bit to go over as this has definitely been a very eventful year for the meta. But before we do that, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support the channel. Only takes 5 seconds to subscribe, which truly does help us channel a lot, and I really do appreciate all the constant support. Now, before we begin, I guess it's important to ask, what do we mean when we say a unit is meta-impactful? Now, that is a very nebulous and even more subjective than just asking how good a unit is. But for me, at least, it is important to note that a unit being meta-impactful is not the same as a unit being good. What is meta-impactful is not the same as what is good. For instance, do I think Milla is the best Light Season Mythic in the game right now? Absolutely not. I think there's Peony, Ash, Asker, a lot of better Light Mythics that I would say are more good than Milla. But do I think those three are more meta-impactful than Milla? Absolutely not. Milla is one of the few units that defines Light and Dark Season, and every Dark defense needs to consider her because her isolation effect has a huge impact on how defenses operate. Thus, what is meta-impactful is more of a measure of what you need to consider. A good way to think about this is to ask, if this unit did not exist, how would things change, or how much would things change? For instance, if Peony didn't exist, then I don't think things would change that much because you don't really consider Peony when making a dark defense. There are a lot of dancers after all. However, if Milla didn't exist, then you bet things would change a lot, at least when it comes to dark defenses, when they don't need to consider her isolation effect or how to circumvent her isolation defense check. Also, a unit's prevalence, their popularity in being used, is extremely important for meta impact. It doesn't matter how powerful or what sort of unique effects they have if no one uses them. A unit not being used is a unit that you don't need to consider when making your teams or playing matches. Thus, availability matters to a certain extent, especially when it comes to sparking or particularly popular banners. It's not entirely a popularity contest, but it does play a role in what is meta impactful. This also means that units that excel in roles or strategies that are relatively unpopular or quote-unquote harder to pull off is less meta-impactful than units that are more straightforward or in strategies that are more easy to pull off. This is especially true when it comes to strategies like Gale Force. Valoria, for instance, is one of the most impactful units you can have on a Gale Force team that can literally make or break your Gale Force execution. But she isn't meta-impactful in general, because Gale Force unfortunately is not a very popular strategy, especially compared to tanking. Now, it is important to note that how a unit impacts, say, Aether Raid's offense versus Aether Raid's defense, versus even Summoner's duels, are very different. To start, with Aether Raids, it's a lot easier to impact defense, because defense is extremely centralized. Offense is super overpowered, and thus there are only a few archetypes that are consistent enough to be able to find success, and thus it is easier to be common in Aether Raid's defense, and to make that splash. Offense, by contrast, has a lot more variety and options due to the nature of Aether Raids being very offense-favored, and thus it is hard to become prevalent and make that splash because there's just so many different and varied units that are currently being utilized, even in the Vault of Heavens. As for Summoner duels, for me personally, I've noticed that it is very influenced by the greater community. Summoner's duels players, especially those looking to climb the ranks, often help each other and share strats, and often a few teams get copied by everyone else. One of the most notable instances of this is by Dark, whose famous Dark Pasta is often used as the gold standard team that everyone tries to then just copy or use. On their own, like my personal instance of this is with Valentine's Lucina. I personally copied a team from Fieri, which I was very much inspired by because I wanted to use Valentine's Lucina, and Fieri used a team with her, and so I was like, I want to do that. And so I basically stole their team. Yeah, This sort of thing happens a lot. Units literally can become meta just from a couple of individuals popularizing them. And this is especially true because, again, the more competitive SD players generally have a very tight-knit community to share these sort of strats. For the purposes of this list, we're only going to consider units introduced in Book VII. So this is from Sather's Banner to Golvik's Banner. So units that are very meta but are released before Book VII will not count, like Summer Thor, who obviously is very meta impactful. And also, only units will be considered. No skills, no structures, no refines, no groups of units or archetypes either. Just to make this a lot more simple, only units themselves and their individual impact will be considered, not the skills they introduced, etc. Well, without further ado, let us begin with number 10. Starting off at number 10, we have the one and only Brave Soren. Now, Brave Soren has a very unique savior effect in being able to apply Assigned Decoy to either his support partner or the unit with the highest defense, and this basically allows any unit to be a save unit. This offers a lot of flexibility in team building and can even get through savior restrictions in most like Summoner's Duels or potentially even AR Chaos. This enables very unique archetypes that are known as like Soren Balls, which are pretty prevalent in SDS. And these are pretty useful because you are able to have units be able to save without lugging these armors around. Because obviously one of the main limitations of armors is their one movement. It's partly why Brave Edelgard ranks pretty high in the SD tier list because of her movement. Well, Brave Soren, you don't even need to worry about armors. You can just have an infantry unit, for example, be able to save and not have to deal with armor movement. Also, it's something that you have to keep in mind is that because Brave Soren just applies the unit with the highest defense as a save on each turn, if your save unit goes down, for instance, Soren can have another unit save as sort of like a backup. So that can be helpful in sort of late game scenarios. Now, Soren is number 10, and that is because unfortunately right now, at the very least, he is pretty limited by the current units. When it comes to far save, because they have to be ranged units to far save, there's really only 2 units that are actually good as saves, and those are New Year's Askers and mainly Summer Emir. It's mainly Summer Emir that's actually good to be an assigned decoy. While near save, there are a lot more options. Near save is also a lot less important, especially in Summer's Duels. And that goes into another thing. Brave Soren is really only impactful in Summer's Duels S. In SDR, Summer Thor just shuts him down completely. Because Assigned Decoy is a bonus, you just pop the dual skill on Summer Thor and boom, that goes away, which makes it pretty unreliable. In addition, in Aether Raid's defense, because of how the phases work, Soren unfortunately does not apply an Assigned Decoy on turn 1, and therefore is very susceptible to turn 1 Gale Force or Hit and Run, which makes it a lot more gimmicky. And while you definitely can use this on Aether Raid's offense, it's not really that prevalent in Aether Raid's offense, and again, like Aether Raid's offense, it's a lot harder to be more prevalent. So for those reasons, Soren is only at number 10 on this list. But without further ado, let's move on to number 9. Speaking of a unit I just mentioned, we have at number 9, New Year's Asker. When he was released, New Year's Asker was pretty much the best cooldown unit, and honestly probably is the best cooldown support unit this year. Being able to charge 2 times to any unit with open domain and the dual skill just allowed a lot of special spamming and AoE teams. Like many teams that rely on specials or AoE required New Year's Asker to be there. He became very, very common in Summer's Duels because of that, because when he was released, specials were everything. AoEs, Deadeye, Lethality, etc. New Year's Asker also had the benefit of being a very effective bulky nuke. He had enough power to be used very offensively and take down a lot of tankier units, and at late game, he can actually checkmate the opponent because of his bulk and the opponent's inability to be able to kill him. Now he is at number 9, and that is because there are other ways to get cooldown. Valentine's Crom is there, and while he can only charge one time per turn to one unit, Valentine's Crom also had the advantage of to change fate, which honestly is a lot more useful, and therefore Valentine's Crom I personally think was a lot more meta and more prevalent. We also had Spring Sonia with the correct team if you were able to get the titles right. So you didn't exactly need New Year's Askers, there were alternatives, but obviously New Year's Asker is on this list for a reason. But another reason why I think he's only number 9 is because specials charging honestly started becoming less and less important. There was a shift from specials to tier 4 NFU skills and the like for DR piercing. Mainly specials were there to enable DR piercing or just avoid it altogether like with AoEs. We'll talk about this later, why that happened, spoiler alert. But yeah, as specials slowly started to decline and AoEs became less common, obviously Askers lost a lot of his meta impact. And this is more of like a side thing, but his damage also can be lacking. It is strong, but it's definitely not as strong as other newts, and it's hard to be consistent to get him to kill a lot of the save units out there. And also, if he's alone, you lose a lot of his tankiness just due to how his kit work. So obviously, very meta impactful unit with the specials, but is at number 9 for a reason. Alright, next up we have number 8. If you followed my channel for a while, you know clearly my thoughts on this unit, but I cannot deny his meta prevalence. It is Femordis, one of the most prevalent saves, specifically in Anima season. You basically see him every other defense you encounter. He is that popular. The action nullification is actually useful on defense because it obviously allows you to more easily shut down more player-face strats like Gale Force specifically. More importantly though, when it comes to availability, his kit, it's like pre-built. It's a very useful kit out of the box. You don't really need to like shift things. You can just slap him on a defense and boom, it's there. Not only that, he was featured and actually won AHR, and therefore is very popular in usage, very frequent in the Vault of Heavens. Honestly, probably the most popular Anima far save. And because Femordis is so popular, obviously he's meta impactful in that sense, in that if you consider him, you'll probably do a lot better than if you didn't. Now, why is he number 8? Well, personally, I think there's just so much better save options. The lack of mythic buffs hurt him quite a lot. Obviously, as a save unit, you scale really well with more HP and just more stats in general, and Femordis can't do that on Aether Raid's defense. And personally, you really need a kit overhaul to make him actually good against like meta players and the like. He does come with a pre-built kit that is effective, but in order to actually work consistently, you definitely would like a kit overhaul with like Hardy Fighter, Aegis, etc. And honestly, just most common units can deal with him, right? And like, also, this is an Anima where the Bolt Tower exists, and not being able to get HP buffs means that he's often at 1 HP after the Bolt Tower hits. So yeah, not a good luck. And we've been talking about Anima for Femordis, and that's generally because his impact is mostly only felt in Anima. He does have some prevalence in Summer's duels, but like not really. And obviously, as an Anima unit, you can't be used in other seasons of Aether Raids, so his impact is limited specifically to Anima, which obviously limits his meta impactfulness overall. Alright, next up we have is number 7. From one save unit for another, we have at number 7, Bridal Tiki, what brave Tiki wishes she was. Bridal Tiki by far is the best far save. Honestly, probably to this day. She is the best far save for most of Book VII ever since she released, and has the best overall matchups against the nukes you encounter. The far save role is very important in a lot of modes like Aether Raid's defense, Summer's duels, etc. And specifically for Summer's duels, Bridal Tiki also has a duel button for that extra action economy, which is extremely important in Summer's duels. Her having Scowl on herself is super strong and impactful. Like, Scowl is one of the best defensive effects you can have right now. So much so that honestly, you can make do without Hardy Fighter for her. And honestly, Scowl, and specifically Bridal Tiki, is part of why Tier 4 NFU skills have started to become more and more prominent as a way to get through DR piercing. It's not the main reason, but it is part of the reason. And because of that, like, she is prominent in pretty much every single mode. She is top tier in Aether Raid's offense, Aether Raid's defense, and Summer's duels. Her versatility and power, again, the best far save since her release, has made her very, very prevalent. Now, she is at number 7, and that is mainly because there are, again, a lot of far safe options. Like, she is the best, but you can make do with other options that can perform almost as well. She faces a lot of competition from others, and if she did not exist, honestly, you can probably replace her and do just as fine. The meta probably wouldn't change too much. And at the end of the day, she is just a save and doesn't really provide anything else. The Scowl that she has is mainly for her own combat, not for others. She's not a support like Veil. For Mortis, while he is lower, does have that action nullification, and if he was able to be used outside of Anima, you would probably see him a lot more. Brave Edelgard, as I mentioned before, has the movement that is super important in SD, and even like someone like Valentine's Lucina, who is not like the best far save for Summer's duels, she has future vision, which is extremely powerful for that mode, for action economy. Bridal Tiki, again, is just a save. She doesn't really do anything else. She does have a button for action economy, but like, so many units have buttons, right? So that isn't really unique to her. But again, still the best far save of Book 7, definitely worthy of this list. Alright, next up we have is number 6. For number 6, we have one of the best support units in the game right now. We have Fallen Maria. Fallen Maria, as you all know, has Drive Life Unending. Not even Drive Miracle, Drive Life Unending, which is very powerful. Miracle plus full heal is very strong support and is pretty much wanted by every single tank and save. Because if a nuke cannot get through that Miracle, boom, the tank gets back to full HP and they have to deal with it all over again. And therefore, Fallen Maria is applicable to almost every single mode. In Aether Raid's offense, you can use her as a support for tanks, which is very powerful. In Aether Raid's defense, she's often used on defense as a deterrent for player face strats to help increase the save's survivabilities in things like Catria Balls so that they are harder to Gale Force or hit and run. And for Summer's duels, she is used as a nuke and again, as a support for those saves. It's part of the reason why Sea Feuds started popping up more and more. It does nullify Fallen Maria and is somewhat prevalent. Unfortunately, like, Sea Feud competes with other C skills. For instance, we have Canto Control, like Time Pulse 4, Oath 4, and more specifically, Guidance and Soaring Guidance. So, Sea Feud is limited. It is there, but the fact that units are running Sea Feud just proves her meta impactfulness. If people are running Sea Feud because of her, and to a lesser extent, Summer and Mir. Now, she is number 6, and that is because, honestly, besides the Sea Feud thing, like, she didn't really change the meta that much. She honestly just, like, slots into pre-existing teams, and wasn't really considered in team building. Again, the main thing that she did change is Sea Feud, which is why she is number 6. But outside of that, like, she didn't really create any new team archetypes in something like Summer's duels. Nukes did not get judged whether or not they were able to beat like Fallen Maria, for instance. And I think it is also important to note that the miracle that she does provide can be mitigated because you don't get the healing until after combat. And therefore, if you're able to get through it by, say, like, attacking them, getting the unit to 1 HP, and then attacking again, like, they can get through that miracle that way. And triangle attack is very common, right? So There are instances where you don't even need Seafood or the like to be able to get through her. And obviously Triangle Attack is very common in Summer's duels and Ether 8's defense. And honestly, so Fallen Maria is there as a last resort. Again, though, she is still super strong support. She is number 6 for a reason, but this is why she isn't higher on that list. Alright, next up we have is number 5. Alright, this placement might get all the angry, misinformed Redditors at me, but number 5, I have Wind Claude. Now, Wind Claude is a very, very powerful unit. He is able to punch through so many takes. The ability to instantly proc lethality with the bonuses is a huge menace that every tank must adapt to be able to deal with him, either with Scowl or by outspeeding him. And honestly, when Claude helped usher in the flyer meta, he provided the damage with the instant lethality and was basically the last piece needed to make flyer lines and flyer teams in something like Summer's duels actually working. Gravity and the DR is just the cherry on top. And because of that, he is very prominent in top tier Ether 8's defense and SD teams. He's frequently slotted into flyer lines and is part of meta SD teams that are centered around flyers. So he is definitely very powerful and meta impactful as evidence of being on this list. That being said, he is really only enabled with Legendary Hinoka. He's not the main enabler himself. He's not the reason that like flyer lines were created or are enabling flyer lines, right? He isn't a unit that quote unquote creates a team, because at the end of the day, he is just a very, very powerful unit. And he actually does have a lot of exploitable weaknesses that top tier players do exploit. For one, he heavily relies on having bonuses, which in something like Summer's duels is a lot more iffy. In something even like Ether 8's defense can be iffy. If you outspeed him, his damage is severely limited, and the gravity that he has is generally meaningless in Summer's duels because, again, everyone's running Guidance 4 or Soaring Guidance, or has like Charge from Legendary Hinoka. And in something like Summer's duels, everyone also has DR Piercing. That's just the norm of the mode. In addition, Wind Claude actually can struggle against meta units. Specifically, these units are Lucia and Halloween Anna. And again, because he relies heavily on bonuses, Summer Thor weakness is very limiting to him as well. Honestly, I was talking to some players, specifically in the CN community, and in Summer's duels R specifically, they actually consider Wind Claude from tier 0 to tier 2 a tier 2 unit, which, yeah, just shows like the differences in perspectives compared to, say, like Reddit and all. I do think people are more scared of Wind Claude than they need to be. Like, Wind Claude is not untankable. Like, I've had conversations with Joel, and he was able to literally tank Wind Claude with Sharena. Let that sink that in. Like, with Sharena. So if Sharena can do it, like, surely other units can do it as well, right? But yeah, at the end of the day, like, again, Wind Claude, to be meta impactful, like, Wind Claude is not a unit that created a team around him. Like, Brave Soren created a team around him. Like, Wind Claude, again, is just a piece that is slotted into a team archetype. But again, still super, super powerful unit. He is number 5 here for a reason. He is annoying for a reason. But yeah, is not at the top because of those reasons I mentioned. All right, next up we have is number 4. Speaking of a certain unit I mentioned previously, that seems to be a running thing, we have at number 4, Lucia. Now, Lucia is really interesting because when she was first released, obviously with her like nullification in her weapon, like she definitely made a splash and became like very meta impactful. But as time moved on and speed got like higher and higher, she sort of started to fall off because of how her weapon works. She can't get speed buffs from like drive speed or other support. She has to rely on the bonuses. And so that made it harder and harder for her to get the speed checks. And therefore, units that are able to get more speed and therefore to be able to cut through a lot of her damage reduction with Repel 4. But with the rise of Gambit with CYL 7 really made her into a huge meta threat because you can no longer outspeed her to get through her damage reduction. And that made her very, very hard to counter because, again, Lucia denies specials, which is like one of the main ways to get through damage reduction besides outspeeding. So denying the outspeeding because of Gambit, it basically literally made physical no follow-up and magical no follow-up the premier option to deal with damage reduction. You see the shift from special DR piercing with Deadeye and Lethality in SD to physical no follow-up and magical no follow-up. And that is because of Lucia Gambit build. And this caused these NFU4 skills to become a lot more prominent. Defeating Lucia is now a meta criteria that nukes are judged on. And that is why she is at number 4. She is like insanely defining because she literally is a criteria that nukes now have to deal with. That being said, this impact is really only felt in Summer's duels. Specifically, there is one team piloted by the CN community with Halloween Anna, Legendary Alir, Summer Thor, her, and then another dancer that is starting to pop up and do the rounds. And that is starting to become a thing teams have to consider. In Ether Raids, though, there is, again, a lot of Omni-Tank options on offense. On defense, you don't use Omni-Tanks, so that's out of the window. But on offense, like, again, we have plenty of God Swords, so it's hard to make a splash there, which is why she is only at number 4. But, again, the impact in Summer's duels cannot be understated. She is literally a criteria that nukes are judged off of. Alright, next up we have is number 3. So last year, I put Elamine as number 1 most meta impactful unit of Book 6. Well, what better way to lead into a unit that completely negates that unit? This is Freyr, the Elamine counter, and shuts down the most meta warping unit of Book 6. So why wouldn't he be here on this list? Astra and Anima was literally defined by Elamine, and so his ability to shut that down immediately rippled throughout the meta. False Start no longer being a concern for Ether Raid's defense is a huge meta impact, and therefore Freyr quickly became pretty prevalent in the high tiers of Anima, and top tier defenses basically need him, because otherwise, like, they would just fold against Elamine, and it's GG's. Again, that's how good Elamine was. Like, it literally made Anima season a joke. But Freyr, thankfully, is here to save us from that, and again, that cannot be understated. The ability to deny Elamine, how meta impactful that is. That being said, Freyr is only at number 3 because, like Lucia, he really is only present in one mode, that being in Ether Raid's defense, specifically in Anima, not even in Dark. So you don't really see him that often in any other mode. That being said, his impact in that one specific season of that one mode is really, really, really high, and therefore deserves number 3 on this list. Alright, next up, we have number 2. At number 2, we have the one and only best addition in FEH, no matter what Connor Zach says. We have Legendary Robin. Oh boy, Legendary Robin ushered in the Unity meta when he was released, and Unity was really dominating the meta, specifically in Summer's duels, but in other modes as well. We had teams created specifically around Grand Strategy and Unity. Unity stacking just like became the way to play the game. So much so that what ordinarily would be considered a good effect, like penalty neutralization, actually became a detriment because you couldn't take advantage of Unity stacking. That's how good Legendary Robin's impact on the meta was. And as you well know, SD copy pastas with him proliferated. Everyone had the Unity A skill running Legendary Robin. If you had Unity in your weapon, that is an additional huge buff. So units like Cynthia, for instance, actually became meta. and were used in the top tiers of Summoner's Duels are. Like, that is legitimately his meta impact, right? Now, the thing is, we do have Ploy now, but Ploy is only valuable because of Legendary Robin. Yeah, Ploy does shut down Bonus Doubler as well, but there were ways already to get through Bonus Doubler, like lull skills, for instance, or dull all skills. Ploy is mainly there for Legendary Robin and really only has value and is really only run because of Legendary Robin. And therefore, even if Ploy exists, he still impacts the meta that way. And regardless of Ploy, like, that is still an impact, right? That is even putting aside the fact that Ploy is not really relevant in Summoner's Duels. The range conditions are very strict for Summoner's Duels, and even so, like, you can just cleanse it by end turning, right? So, yeah, Ploy, I can count on one hand how many times I've actually encountered Ploy in Summoner's Duels, and so Legendary Robin obviously still has value. Even if you just remove one layer of Grand Strategy, Legendary Robin still offers the activation of the Unity Ace skill through his self-debuffs. Honestly, the reason why Legendary Robin has sort of fallen off is not because of Ploy, actually. It's because Legendary Robin himself as a unit is not that great of a nuke, and therefore can be hard to kill things. That being said, again, he is very, very prominent to this day in Aether Raid's defense and in Summoner's Duels. Some defenses even ran Legendary Robin off-season, and obviously, during Earth Season, he appeared as Aether Raid's offense support for those Omni tanks and saves. So, yeah, definitely number 2 here. Very, very meta-impactful unit indeed. But before we get into our number 1 meta-impactful unit of Book 7, let us first go through some honorable mentions. So our first honorable mention is mainly just due to the timing of when I put these videos out. We have Emblem, who unfortunately was released after I made the Book 6 video, but obviously she's not Book 7, so she's here as an honorable mention. Obviously, Emblem is one of the units that define what Dark Season is, and had a huge impact on saves and Omni-Tank support. She honestly was part of the reason why we shifted to bonuses instead of drives as supports. So Emblem is here, definitely very impactful. Still Book 6 though, even though I did release the video before her banner. Sorry about that. Next, we do have Halloween Anna and Legendary Alear. Halloween Anna, again, I mentioned she was very prominent as part of that Omni-Tank team with Lucia in Summoner's Duels. The Chinese and Japanese community is very, very high on her in Summoner's Duels, and she's probably going to pop up a lot in those modes. Unfortunately, we've only had a couple of SD seasons since her release, so it's hard to judge how meta-impactful she actually will be, but I do think it is warranted to have her here as an honorable mention. Same thing with Legendary Alear. Again, part of that Omni-Tank team, but also just as a support unit, having literally any unit be able to have damage reduction piercing is really, really good. Is featured in like Cavline teams in Summoner's Duels, for instance, and things like that, just as a support. And she is also, in general, the best Omni-Tank in the game right now because of her dual phase Brave and her special, being able to pierce through damage reduction. And so she also warrants an honorable mention here as well. We also have these skills. Again, this list is mainly just for units, but I do think it is important to acknowledge that specifically Guidance 4 probably has more meta impact than literally any of these units. Guidance 4 and Soaring Guidance like literally changed SD. It became like the hardy fighter of 2023, right? Like before then, there was only really one skill that you really needed to succeed in Summoner's Duels, and that was hardy fighter. Now that skill is Guidance 4 or Soaring Guidance. More normally Soaring Guidance right now. So yeah, I mean Guidance 4 and Soaring Guidance is not just in SD. You can see them a lot in Aether Raid's defense as well. And we also have another skill here being the new Ruse 4 skill. Now as of time of recording, we only have one of these, and it's fairly recent too, so obviously it's hard to gauge the complete meta impact, especially in a mode like Summer's Duels where the range restriction can be a huge hindrance, and action economy is a huge issue. But at least for something like Aether Raids, this will be a huge menace. Like, literally Ruse 4 plus Veil is a free win for Aether Raids, like, legitimately. Like, that's how sorry the state of defense is right now. So while the verdict remains to be seen how good Ruse is in Summer's Duels, at least in Aether Raids, the impact is pretty clear and therefore deserves warranted this mention as an honorable mention. Now, I did mention Veil, and Veil is an honorable mention. Again, Veil plus Ruse 4 is literally a free win in Aether Raids, even in the top tier of the Vault of Heavens. Like, legitimately, Scowl, being able to have Scowl support is just so strong. Like, Scowl is one of the strongest defensive abilities that you can have right now, and Veil being able to have that as a support is extremely strong. Now, she does get countered by Beef Feud, but honestly, like, you don't really see Beef Feud. Maybe if she becomes more meta prevalent, you'll start seeing that more, but honestly, the feud that you generally run is C Feud, again, because of Maria. So, Veil does not meet this, the threshold needed to make Beef Feud a consideration, at least not yet. She is here as a honorable mention because, again, as an offense mythic, it's harder to impact offense than it is to defense, but her effect is so powerful that I figured it is worth a mention. And last, but certainly not least, we have Golvek and Kvaser. As of the time of recording, they've only been out for a couple days, so it is really hard to judge their meta impact right now. Personally, I don't think it'll impact the defense meta that much, but I'm just going to put these two here just for completeness sake, in recognition that, you know, it's only been like a couple of days, so it's really, really hard to determine how meta impactful they'll actually be. But hey, they're here. Alright, with those honorable mentions out of the way, it is now time to go to our top meta impactful unit of Book 7. This is number 1. At number 1, I don't think this is any of a surprise, we have Legendary Hinoka. Legendary Hinoka is literally the units that pushed flyers into the forefront of the meta, specifically ranged flyers. Like, her ability to grant flyers charge just makes the threat range of flyer teams extremely oppressive. She literally created the flyer line archetype. Her having sweep, having armor effectiveness, giving herself and flyers acceleration is just the cherry on top that really makes her and her teams a powerful force. And because of that, she is prevalent, again, in every single mode, to the point where people run her off-season in Aether Raid's defense just because her effect is that powerful. What she enables is that powerful. She is also one of the highest usages in Summer's Duels, and obviously, as Legendary, is a menace in Arena as well. Like, the impact of Legendary Hinoka cannot be understated. She is why, like, we have those flying copy pasta teams in Summer's Duels, and why right now Soaring Guidance is starting to become more preferred rather than Guidance 4. Like, she pushed flyer nukes in general into the meta tier, and I don't think there's really any argument. Legendary Hinoka has a huge impact in Aether Raid's defense with the flyer lines as an evolution of Cav lines. She has an impact in Summer's Duels, again, with those flyer-based teams. Like, she's literally everywhere. And yeah, she is definitely the most meta-impactful unit of Book 7. And yeah, that concludes the top 10 meta-impactful units of Book 7. Do let me know down in the comments what your list would be for the most meta-impactful units, what edition you think impacted the meta the most. And yeah, hopefully y'all enjoyed it. It's always super fun to do these sort of lists to recap the end of the book. And yeah, if you did enjoy it, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, all that jazz to help support our channel. Only takes 5 seconds to subscribe, but it truly does help our channel a lot, and I really do appreciate all the constant support. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. See you next year with another Book 8 top 10 list. We'll see how that goes. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and see you all next time. Bye, everyone.